2, 1. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the agenda for Parks, Library, and Arts. It is Tuesday, February the 2nd, 2021. I wish you a happy February, everybody. I am going to go ahead and make a motion pursuant to Governor Lee's Executive Order number 71 regarding electronic meetings. I make a motion that this committee meeting agenda constitutes essential business of the Metro Council and that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. Do I have a second? Looking for a second on the electronic motion.
Second.
Thank you. And welcome. I am going to go ahead and commence with the calling of the roll, so make sure I don't miss anybody before we vote, so that I can make sure we get that right. Actually, let's do it this way. In the event of calling the roll, if you could vote for the affirmative or negative regarding electronic meetings, that'll be efficient. Hager.
Here. Aye.
Bradford. Gamble. Hancock.
Affirmative.
Thanks. Hauser.
Yes.
Henderson. Murphy.
I'm not on your committee anymore.
You're still on the list, so you can feel free to vote if you'd like. According to my records, you're still on the list.
Earlier this year.
The council office will need to fix that if you could ask them again. Is Stiles present? Syracuse.
Aye.
Fantastic. 5 in favor, 0 against. Murphy in limbo. Thank you very much. Okay, we have just a handful of resolutions. If there is no objection, I'd like to go ahead and take them on a consent agenda. The resolution 737, 738, 739, and 740. Are any of those items something that needs to be pulled from consent? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and read the captions. Resolution RS 2021-737 approves an application for a major cultural institution grant from the Tennessee Arts Commission to the Metro Arts Commission to provide general operating support. Resolution 2021-738 approves Amendment 1 to a grant from the Nashville Parks Foundation to the Metro Nashville Parks and Recreation Department to fund improvements to the Elmington Park tennis courts. Resolution 2021-739 accepts a grants package from the Friends of Warner Parks to the Metro Board of Parks and Recreation to continue funding staff positions and copier costs. And Resolution RS 2021-740 accepts an in-kind grant from the Friends of Shelby Park and Bottoms to the Metro Board of Parks and Recreation to provide golf course design services for tree replacement caused by the March 2020 tornado. May I have a motion for the consent agenda?
So moved.
I make the motion.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Hancock, seconded by Hauser. Is there any conversation regarding these items? One last chance. All right. I will do a roll call vote, and at the end of this roll call vote, there'll be comments from the chair, and we'll have a little bit of time with each other to talk about another subject. So on the consent agenda, Mr. Hager.
Aye.
Bradford, still not here. Hancock,
Affirmative.
Hauser,
Yes.
Syracuse.
Aye.
And the chair votes in favor. So all of those items, 5 in favor, 0 against, no abstentions. Thank you for the matter of the agenda. I did want to make sure that this committee knew that I really encourage you, if you did not attend, to make sure and listen to the Budget and Finance Committee conversation yesterday concerning the issue of the salaries being given to Parks employees. And I know that we've gotten a lot of conversation back and forth about it. I want to let you know that I had been in contact as soon as I found out about the circumstances, both with the Parks Department and the Finance Department, and subsequently with the SEIU. And I really feel like that yesterday, the information received from the Finance Department and the vibrant question and answer period serves this committee as well. Chair Toombs decided not to call a joint meeting, but I think that this committee needs to make sure and review that information if you have not. Since that time, today at the Parks Board meeting at noon, I dropped in to let them know that this committee was dedicated to the employees of the Parks Department, that we understand the circumstances, and that we're doing our best to make sure that we take the opportunity to remind our colleagues as well as the general public the value that our Parks employees bring to this city. There are going to be opportunities for us to kind of speak to our intent of that value in the budget cycle. I don't think that there's any time like the present to remind people how important all of our Metro employees are, but particularly to speak often and with a full voice, our commitment and our dedication to all of our Parks employees. I feel that both with Councilmember Mendez's recommendation as well as mine today, the Parks Board, that there's a commitment for them to be working with each employee one-on-one to come up with individual solutions, and that the SEIU will be involved in those discussions. That's been something that I've asked for, as well as Mr. Mendez and others on this committee, as well as Budget and Finance. I wanted just to make sure that we said this out loud at this meeting because we haven't had the chance to be able to speak on it publicly. And I wanted to be able to allow those on this committee to have discussion at this point if they so desire. You can raise your hand if you'd like to speak on this matter. I'm seeing Councilmember Hauser first. Go ahead.
Yes, and I was not able to hear all of the budget discussion on this. Do you know if it was mentioned what the maximum amount that any one employee might need to pay back?
I don't know if there's somebody from the Finance Department online, but each individual will have a unique situation, and some more, some less, depending on how it. Mr. Cooper, is there somebody from Finance available to answer that question?
I don't see anyone on this meeting, but I do know that Finance is in the process of determining the exact amount that each employee was overpaid. And so once they get that calculated, that's when we'll be having those conversations. But they, as of yesterday afternoon, they were still trying to determine that amount.
The reason I had asked is if it was $150, then that's not as difficult to work out a plan to pay back as if it's $10,000. So
It was more than the lower number and less than the higher number.
That's correct. And I think that one of the things, thank you, Ms. Hauser. I think one of the things that I wanted to pull attention to is that no parks employee should have to, in the course of trying to repay the overage, suffer. And so that's going to be something that's going to have to be taken care of meticulously. And $150 to some folks is significant. And so we want to make sure that we're trying to solve the issue one by one instead of with a blanket. And that's what I'm really relying on the parties with the Parks Department, HR, Finance, and SEIU to work together towards that. If we hear as a committee that that is not being successful, then we will absolutely address it. Ms. Hancock, your hand is up next.
I have not yet listened to it, but I will vow to, after the next meeting, do that. My question is, was it addressed about the taxes? Because with W-2s having to be issued by the end of January, were their W-2s done correctly or incorrectly? And I'm guessing as John said, they hadn't finished doing the numbers yet.
Yeah, as it was explained to me, as I understood what was explained to me, that's part of the delay in the calculation, making sure that it's meticulously determined as to whether or not the repay is going to be net, gross, how that affects taxes, making sure that they're not having to pay more than what was sent, and if taxes were sent. I mean, just trying to kind of work out those details paycheck by paycheck so that the individual knows a clear number, where it came from, and then to work out a plan to make it whole again.
And I assume since we've identified all these individuals, we could also issue a modified W-2 in a couple of weeks so that they could file their taxes properly. Is that correct?
That would be an assumption that the HR department could verify at that time, but I mean, they'll do the right thing.
The statement that Mary Jo made yesterday is that the earnings that they received in last calendar year were earnings, and that would count towards their taxes for last year, but that there would be an adjustment made for the next year.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest unfortunate thing that I see, in addition to the timing, is, what if that put them into a different tax bracket and then they wouldn't have had to pay that percentage, but because they didn't have that little in favor. And that probably isn't the case for everyone, but that's what I would be concerned about if I were doing the math.
That really speaks to the importance of each individual being addressed one by one. So that's a really good point. I'm seeing Mr. Agger. Go ahead. Larry Hager, you're recognized.
Hi. Did we ever determine how this occurred? I've heard it's gone back and forth between Parks and Department of Human Resources. And the reason I asked that is because I got a person called me today. His wife was a school teacher. She passed away. He had a survivorship annuity. They had been paying him under the survivorship annuity from Human Resources. Then they sent him a letter and said, oh, she wasn't an employee at the time. As such, we've overpaid you $14,000 and we want the money back. So it appears this is happening quite a bit, and I don't understand why, but I just wanted to know if we found out why this happened to begin with, what's going to be done to rectify it in the future.
It's a reasonable question. Some of it was addressed yesterday in Budget and Finance, but I do see that Mary Jo Wiggins has joined our meeting, and we'll let her to address that as well as any updates. Ms. Wiggins, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Chair Van Rees. Can you hear me? Excellent. Okay. And I'm happy to go back and just address a few of the questions that I did hear from Councilwoman Hancock. I think you asked about somebody asked about the maximum amount. I'm sorry, I think that was Council Lady Hauser. The smallest amount was $245 of an overpayment. The largest amount is actually close to $4,000. So there is a pretty big range. The average was $2,400 in overpayment. Councilwoman Hancock, you're right. The tax implication is very tricky. And that's the piece that we are making sure not only that we calculate correctly, but that we also follow IRS, requirements and rules. So there will be a tax credit to these employees for exactly the reason that you state, that the additional earnings may have impacted what their normal tax bracket would have been. So taking all of that into account does delay the eventual, the solution for each individual employee. And then the question was just, how did it happen? It was really just an inadvertent mistake where across Metro, not just the Parks Department, but across Metro, when employees were submitted for approval to receive the hazard pay, what the process really looked at each role and responsibility. And it was determined that not every hour worked by an individual may meet all of that criteria for hazard pay. So it may have been just a portion of that employee's hours worked, either by a number of hours or a percentage, or a split time of some sort in their role. And so that eligibility process then resulted in how many hours either per week or percentage. And when there was one template that was sent to every department with instructions on how to fill that template out. And it was pretty basic. It was enter the number of hours to be paid. And in this situation, unfortunately, there was confusion and all hours were submitted rather than just the percentage that were deemed eligible based on the criteria. So that's how the overpayment. So you had some employees who may have only been approved for 10% of their hours and 100% of their hours were submitted. And that's why for those employees with a lower percentage that had been approved had a greater overpayment than those who maybe had 80% of their hours approved. They would have had a lower overpayment. And then there were some employees where 100% of their hours were approved, and so there was no overpayment. Theirs was accurate. So that's how that happened.
Thank you for that. I'm looking again. Ms. Hauser, did you have a follow-up question, or is your hand still up from before?
Yes.
Go ahead.
It's a new hand. And I'm asking this as a question. It's not the solution. But I am wondering, because I would not want any of these employees to have some sort of penalty. In other words, obviously they need to pay the principal back in some manner that we deem appropriate. But also, as we said, it could impact which bracket they are in tax-wise, but even more so if any of them qualify for earned income tax credit, that is a major thing to lose. And so I would urge, as we're having those conversations, that we check that out. And my question to Mr. Cooper is, do we as a council need to write some sort of resolution regarding that we want to make sure these employees are whole, if they're not subject to any kind of penalty, if there are any penalties, that Metro covers the cost of those? I'm not sure legally how all that can be done, but I would want to make sure if someone loses their daycare supplement or their earned income tax credit, that we work with the IRS so if they don't lose it, or if they do, that really needs to be our responsibility. How would that be handled? And I'll mute again so that can be answered.
I think at this point, we just don't have enough information since they are considering each employee on a case-by-case basis. I think once we have more information, then we can determine whether there's any legislative action needed. But I think at this point, that would be premature.
I really appreciate that insight, Ms. Hauser, and I think that it's one of the reasons I believe that having eyes on this as it's processed and letting the individuals affected know that there is their own council member or at-large council members and this committee that they could go to in addition to the SEIU if they're concerned about the equity in which they're being treated. This is not the end of the discussion. This is the beginning of the discussion, and I'm hoping, Ms. Wiggins, are you still anticipating HR having the data ready to start those discussions by the end of the week so that people can anticipate having those conversations one-on-one beginning next week? Is that what you're hoping for?
That was the original plan. I think as we have peeled back additional layers on the complexity, I don't want to speak for payroll and for some of the legal advice that we're making sure we do it correctly. So it may not be as soon as next week that we start communicating on the one-on-one as far as what the actual amounts are and how that rolls out. But that we are engaging the folks that we need to make sure that we need to do this by IRS regulations.
Thank you for that. I seeing no other committee member with their hand raised. I recognize Emily Benedict. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate the letting me join and ask a question here as a part of your committee. I just wanted to point out that the Parks Department really was the leading department in the city reopening last May and June. So, you know, when I think about who put their lives at risk at a time that was very uncertain in regards to COVID-19, these folks really took a risk and were out there in front of others. So I appreciate the hard look that everybody's taking on this. And I just wanted to make sure that that was, you know, heard, and that folks that think about the Parks Department, that in this committee, that we're talking about that and recognizing the risks that these folks took at a time that we really didn't understand exactly the risk that perhaps they were taking. And that's, you know, nationwide. That's not a Nashville thing. We've learned a ton more about the illness over the past few months, as we all know. I think one other question that I have for Ms. Wiggins about the tax is, hypothetically, if I am somebody that, you know, I'm XYZ pay and this bumped my family into a different tax bracket. So, you know, we're talking about a couple grand, but let's say that my family now, it's bumped our family income and we filed jointly. Is that something that's also going to be looked at to make sure that, again, going back to Councilwoman Hauser's question around earned income tax credit and making sure that we keep these employees whole, that we're looking at that entire tax picture in that conversation next week? I just think that we might be, make sure that we don't miss that.
Thank you for that question. I will take that back. That is one of, as we talk about, you know, making sure that we have the right legal counsel, that we're following IRS guidelines. We currently would not have that kind of insight. We wouldn't have that purview. That would be something that each employee would have to voluntarily bring to us. So we don't have that right now, but I think that's a really important, you know, question to make sure that we consider. How can we best help each of these families accomplish getting whole? And so thank you for bringing up, you know, that impact, and I'll pass that along. But it isn't something that we have purview to just through normal payroll records.
Right. Understood. Absolutely. And that's something that I know they'll have to volunteer and also have an understanding of. Here we are, you know, at a time that most people haven't even filed yet, or just are beginning to file here at the 1st of February, 2nd of February today. So I just, you know, obviously my hope, as I talked about in budget and finance, well, I didn't talk about it last night in budget and finance. I had an audio issue, but my hope is that we're able to not claw this money back. I hope that we're able to find a solution around that. But certainly if that's something that as we work on things next week, my hope would be that we take into consideration the great work that these folks did, and that's always front of mind for us. So thank you again, Chair, for indulging me and talking here during your committee. I'm going to join the committee that I sit on and talk to you. See you soon.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate everyone participating in this conversation. As I said, it's the beginning of the conversation, not the end of it. And I think that I want to make sure and remind everybody that the way to make our parks employees feel as though we understand their value is in the upcoming budget. If there's a way for us to analyze whether or not the reason that $250 damages my family, that's a problem. It's the adage of you get real busy pulling people out of the water whenever they're drowning, as opposed to going upstream to find out who's throwing them in the water to begin with. We need to make sure as a committee and as a Metro Council say, you know what, we woke up, we realized how valuable, how important it is for our park system to be vibrant and to be loved on in a way to where we understand that the person doing the landscaping, doing the mowing, taking care of the golf carts is something that makes our city work. And we need to make sure that we are mindful of that. And if there's any silver lining in this thing, I think that as your chair, I feel like that we need to remind ourselves of that when it comes to budget season and do our best to respond in the way in which we're responding now, if we really want to talk about the value of these employees. So I see Ms. Hauser still has her hand up. We do need to probably yield the floor. Did you have another thing to say?
A very, very specific thing that I have a request for Mary Jo, because some of the employees may not necessarily think, oh, yes, I qualify for EIC. Yes, I qualify for Section 8. I qualify for. So my request to Mary Jo is, could you, in the questioning or however you want to do this without making people feel like we're getting too personal, but make sure that those questions in one way or manner are asked, because the individuals may or may not think about bringing those up. So I think it's part of our duty to make sure that we bring those questions up and make sure that if they are going to get knocked out of receiving the voucher or knocked out of something, that maybe Metro Department can work with that department so that that doesn't happen. Thank you. And I'm done now. I just wanted to make sure that got out there to Mary Jo. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. And I think that if you can work with the Financial Empowerment Center for the appropriate language and for help along the way, to include them as yet another partner to make this work, I think that would be extremely prudent. So committee, thank you so much for all that you're doing to make this the city we love. And I will call this meeting adjourned, and we'll see you at the big top.